Good evening, all. Welcome to the first ever Juanstone live stream. I'm your host, Dan Juanstone. How do you do? Today, we're going to be breaking down a track that was off my second EP that came out last year. The track is called Erebus. It's the fourth track off of the Only Way Out Is Through EP. So just a little bit of a summary. The track Erebus, the track name actually came from history. It came from Franklin's expedition, which was in the 1800s, an expedition that went horribly wrong whilst trying to cross the Arctic Circle. Something that was quite of interest to me. Made quite a few references to it in this track, obviously not lyrically, but we'll get to that in a little while. So hopefully you're all somewhat familiar with the track at least anyways. Just giving a quick shout out to the chat. Good to see you, James. Good to see you, Brianna. Hope all's going good. If you are in the chat, just give us a shout. Obviously, we're live on YouTube and Twitch. We are also on Instagram live. Hello. Give a little wave there. I can see a few new people in there. If you are watching on Insta, we are live on Twitch and YouTube as well. So if you guys want to jump over, we're about to get started. If you're watching on Insta, you won't be able to hear anything that we're doing here, unfortunately. So you might want to get on over. Right. So first off, basically this, what we're looking at right now, obviously I'm going to try and cater this to people that aren't familiar with what they're looking at. I'll try not to be too verbose in my descriptions of certain elements of the track. I'll try and keep it simple. But obviously, if you have any questions, ask them in the chat. I'm more than happy to discuss anything after the fact as well. So basically what we have here, these are called channels. And so in each of these, you'll see like these little blocks that we've got here. And all of these represent different musical instruments that are in the track. So, for example, I'll go in a lot more detail on these coming up. But obviously what we've got here is a kick. So hopefully all you can hear that as well. Basically, there's a kick. Here we've got a snare drum. And if I play those, that sort of gives you the idea that as we're coming down this track here, or at least as we're going down the screen, you can see all the different elements that actually make up this piece of music. So I'm just going to start from the top, work my way to the bottom. Hopefully gives you guys a little bit more insight as to what I do. I did get a few questions about this at the Radio City Social gig last year in November. Shout outs to Dan Harvey and the Radio City Social crew. There was a really big shout, one of the best gigs I've ever played, ever had the honour of playing last year. And I had quite a few people actually ask me about the setup, about how I actually made the tracks, how I did my live set. And this actually what spurred me on to start this stream today. Hopefully that answers a few questions for you guys. So just starting from the top, what we have at the top here is a reference track and the actual studio original of the track. What we have open here in Ableton at the moment is what I prepared for the live set. So as a little bit of background for the more musical aficionados out there, I switched my music making software last year from Cubase to Ableton. Big ups to Lee Franklin on that one, who helped us secure Ableton, which is a much, much more efficient music creating platform. Sorry, Cubase. Loved you and left you. Maybe I'll come back one day, but for now, Ableton is where it's at. And so what we have here in the original is the studio original, which what I'll do is I'll just play the original and play the new one. I think for most of you, you're probably not going to be able to hear a massive difference. It's probably one of the few tracks that didn't have a huge difference to recreating it in Ableton. There was other older tracks that really did have a huge impact with regards to making it in this new software. But yeah, just to for comparison. This is the original. And if I just unmute that, what you're hearing here is the new Ableton mix. So again, probably hearing not massively different. Again, back to the original. So the highs come through a little bit clearer. The bass is a little bit more dense in the original, I think. But I can hear a lot more clarity in the new mix. I don't know about yourselves. Obviously, if you guys hear a difference, let us know in the chat. What I have at the top here is a reference track. So usually a reference track is like a technique that I picked up to be able to compare your production to another production out there. So my reference track for this has been from a Berlin-based producer called Resident. Very big fan of his and his productions. He's got a track called Inner Circle, which you can hear here. It's a little bit warped because it's been slowed down to fit the tempo. And so what I've been doing is like using that as my reference for levels. I've been using that to be able to tell the difference, or at least try and compare my track to a track that already exists. Amusingly enough, I did actually use this reference track. For those of you who are tuning in from Resonance, shout outs to Resonance. This was actually a track that I brought in. So Resonance is at the Hotbox venue in Chelmsford, where producers are encouraged to bring in tracks that they're working on, so they're able to hear them on the big speakers, able to get feedback from colleagues, peers, etc. And I actually nearly blew up the Hotbox speakers. So apologies if you're hearing this Hotbox. It wasn't my intention to completely destroy your sound system. But because of this reference track, like I actually nearly did. So yeah, like a little bit of work to do with regards to compared to reference tracks. But hopefully that establishes these two at the top of the page here. So hopefully so far everything's going good in terms of how you guys are following. That's just to do with these two tracks at the top here. So what I'm going to do is get started on the actual track itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of these different colored areas bit by bit, explain what they are, and then at the end we'll listen to a piece of the final mix and just get an idea of like what all of these different elements sound like together to make up the final piece. So just to start with, underneath here we've got these things called buses, or at least we've got here your drum bus. Drum bus with a low side chain and a high side chain. So I'm going to explain the side chain a little bit later when it becomes a little bit more relevant to the point. What we're going to start, but basically these three are groups. You can see here that underneath this specific group there's many different elements. If I open up this group, there's a lot more different elements, and in this group there's a lot more different elements. So as I say, we're going to find out a little bit more about those in a bit, but what we'll start with first is the drums. So let's just get rid of these. So basically, in terms of the drums, for this style of music, you've basically got a so the style of music that I prefer to make in is known as progressive house, trance. Progressive house is usually the moniker given to it, but it's 4 to the floor. Which is basically means like every beat is a kick, like as opposed to breaks that you'll find in other styles such as drum and bass, dubstep, etc. They're all signifies of different rhythms. The rhythm that I prefer to produce in is house, so it's just 4 to the floor, which is basically a kick drum. Basically a kick drum that hits on every beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so like if we play the drum bus just by itself with the different elements in there, we can hear the kit all together. So we've got our kick, we've got our snare, got some shakers, some hi-hats, fried in that percussion. Not the most dense drum bus or drum group that like I've toyed around with, but there's quite a few times where going a bit more complex isn't really necessary. So if we just start off with the kick, as you heard, like the 4 to the floor, if I just, so what we're looking at the bottom here as well are what we call plugins. So all of these different plugins manipulate the sound wave in a particular way. So if I turn all of these off, what you hear here is the sound of the kick just on its own. This is the original sample that would have dragged in from the sample pack. I can do a different stream or a different episode on sample packs later on down the line. So with these, basically what I've done with the kick, just done a little bit of processing. Now, each of these, they'll will all follow like a similar pattern, which is there's 3 main, especially on some of these older tracks. I basically apply 3 different things mainly outside of different effects. The 3 processes that usually get applied are EQ, compression, and saturation. Obviously, like probably a little bit too verbose to go into detail into what each of those 3 do. Might even be best left to look into YouTube, or as I said, if you guys want to hit me up after, I'll be happy to talk about this one-on-one, or to be able to do another episode on this later on down the line. So basically, I'll explain each one as I come along. The first thing that I usually apply is EQ, equalization. So hopefully you guys get a bit of an idea of what I'm going for, or at least what I'm talking about, like with this visual here. So if I just play, what you're seeing behind here is the actual sound wave itself. So if you ignore these yellow lines just all around here, you can see in the back this little, well, now it's glowing purple. This is the actual sound wave of the kick itself. And so here, this is where I'm manipulating the sound. So if I was to just highlight over here, you can hear this particular frequency, which is one where if we actually bring this up, I would have brought down because I believed it was peaking too high in that one particular area. So again, like I said, to be able to explain in full would probably require its own episode. But what I've done here is I've basically taken off the bottom part of the sound, chopped off the top part, and this mid-range section here, which we can hear just if I solo that all on its own, I've decided to bring a little bit down. So I've basically said, let's take out the bottom rumble, let's take out a bit of the top as well, and just leave a little bit of that midsection to be able to like essentially breathe and deliver the sound. All of this here, all of this sound wave that's happening down there and at the top, it's all down to context. It all depends on what you want that particular track or that particular instrument to deliver. And so I'm saying all of that bottom part here, all of this bottom sound wave is useless. All of this top sound wave is useless because essentially, if I turn this off, again, not a huge difference, but if you have a lot of different sound waves with this particular area going off, then that will affect the mix and it will make it what we call muddy. It will mean there's too much information all contained in one area. Almost like a game with EQ is to have as many to have each of these sound waves inhabiting their own part of the space. So like down here, for instance, where I'm highlighting is where you want your more bassier tones because they're lower in frequency. At this high end, you'll want all of your cymbals, your hi-hats, probably even snares or whatnot, because they're very like, they're very high in the frequency spectrum range. So for something like a kick drum that's quite bassy, quite oomphy, you still want a fair bit of bass and a fair bit of low end, but you don't want that top end information, even though there's not much going, because you want to save as much space and resources as possible for the instruments that really matter. You basically want to try and squeeze as much of the sound wave as possible into what you want to get out of it. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense. I'm going to just try and move along here real quick. I've got another plugin here that's called the UAD Pool Tech. Again, I'm not going to go massively into tech, but this just makes that bass sound a little bit more sweet. It gives it a little bit more punch, a little bit more oomph. I could probably have a whole I could kiss the arse of this plugin pretty much relentlessly for how much of a difference it's made to especially my low end signals. But again, out of the spectrum of this clip, but most definitely can recommend Pultec. So if we hear without this and we bring it in, this might be where headphones come in handy. Apologies, didn't mention that, like, obviously this episode is going to be a lot more beneficial with headphones in. So like, if you're listening through a phone speaker, obviously don't worry if you haven't got headphones handy, but if you have, I'd recommend going to grab them. But this is the bee's knees as far as I'm concerned. Absolutely love this plugin. I'll talk more about that later. Compressor or compression. So in a nutshell, compression is when a certain signal reaches above a certain threshold. It, rather than putting a cap on that signal, basically by like cutting the signal completely off above a certain threshold, it means that it will, you might have to see the camera as I'm going it, rather than a cut straight across, it will recognize when it goes above a certain frequency and just bring it down like at an angle, at a curve. So rather than just like say nothing gets above this line, nothing goes above here, it says, okay, you're above here, but we're just going to bring that down. And so what that means is that like you don't get this sound that just completely clips off at the top, but instead, depending on the settings that you put in, can just give a nice tight curvature to anything that could be pushing above a certain frequency. So in English, or at least like to illustrate that a little bit more better, if you can see this little diagram at the bottom, this blue line here basically says where the compressor is going to be working, where the action is going to be happening. So it says anything above this blue line, we're going to manipulate. And this yellow line here at the top is how much that signal is getting manipulated. So if I move the ratio up, you can see that that increases. And if I move it down, you can see it decreases. So move that back to where it was. Basically, what that means is that a sound that has quite a high peak, but like has a lot of information that's sitting there at the bottom. It means it's like a tide that raises all of the sound frequencies up. But rather than like cutting everything off at the top, it's able to just round it off so that you still get quite a full, rich sound to it. So what we've covered so far is EQ. EQ is the where. We want to say, where does this certain instrument or where does this sound sit in the mix? And then we have a compressor that says if something's a little bit too quiet, we can bring it up. We can bring it up without having to say like no sounds above this frequency. It's basically a way of making something that's just like quite, quite loose and making it quite tight and punchy. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense. Let's see. Johnny, nice to see you, Johnny, in the chat. Anyone else who's watching in the chat, if you want to just give us a quick holler. Quite limited of seeing who's actually in at the moment, but obviously would help if I could see what's going on. Like I said, I'm happy to answer any questions that are going on there as well. So the last bit about the kit, because obviously I want to move on to the other tracks, not try and dawdle too long on the different tools, is saturation. So I use a tool called Isotope Trash. What saturation does is it's basically distortion. So similar to a guitar distortion, if you were to play a guitar clean, distortion introduces technically anyways, introduces different harmonics to a sound wave without actually increasing the volume of the sound wave. So it's almost like making something sound louder without actually turning up what we call the gain. So what we call the main dry signal. I believe that's what distortion, the technical term for distortion, saturation, but most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with distortion. With saturation, it's a very, very light distortion that introduces those harmonics the same way, but like just on a very tiny level, and gives a sound a certain crispness, a certain richness, but also in terms of where everything sits in a mix, actually makes it sound Like, you know, it can bring it up in a similar way to compression. So compression makes something sound fuller, whereas a saturation can not just bring that up in the mix without adjusting the volume, but also can make it sound a little bit more crisp, a little bit more rich in its character. So if we just hear that, so we hear it without the saturation, and again, headphones be a big help here. If we turn that saturation on, there, so barely a lick of difference, barely any, but in terms of the whole mix, and obviously to most producers, this is huge. Like in terms of like saving resources from one area, moving them to another, we will basically, like, saturation is a huge shout. So like these three things, your EQ and compression and the saturation, all three of these are what I will mainly be covering in all of the different tracks. So that we'll leave that as the kick, and we'll move on to the snare. And again, I won't go into too much detail on all three of those. I'll just try and like walk through, just sort of give you guys an idea of all the different tracks we're working with. Just give it a quick shout on Instagram as well. If you're watching, then the links to watch are in my link in bio. Should be a card.co link. If you see there, you'll be able to watch with all of us on YouTube and Twitch. So moving on to the snare. So the snare drum, if we just preview this quick. So the snare only makes an appearance in the track right at the very end of the track, actually. So in the final breakdown, if we hear, there's actually all of these different sections in the track, like the build-up or whatnot, that doesn't have a snare. It's just a kick and a hi-hat to accentuate the rhythm sections. So it's basically just all build until the final climactic payoff of introducing the snare drum. So the snare is actually made up of two different elements. It's made up of this snarey, sounds a bit like a bit of a wood chippy sound, doesn't it? So another thing that we've got on here is a reverb, by the sounds of it. It actually sounds like it's built into the sample itself. So we've got that, and a clap as well. So both of these, both of these have a lick of reverb attached to it. Reverb, for those who don't know, is basically how I make all of my music. It's my cheat code. If I didn't have reverb, I would just sound like some tosser with a banjo. I'll probably do to quite a few, so apologies in advance. However, the reverb is just an echo effect, like a cavernous, like basically you imagine like you're in a church hall. It's the sound reverberating off the walls. I'm sure you guys know what reverb is. Delay, there's another one as well. Delay. Similar to reverb, but it's just a signal that is repeated over and over. So rather than quite a washy sound, it's quite a stepped sort of staccato sound to that one. So together, basically, this the snare bus has two of those put together. What we have here as well, you might see on the screen, there's a 10R and a 10L. What that means is that this is panning. So this means that this snare is panned a little bit to the right-hand side, as you might be able to hear. And this clap is panned to the left side that you guys may want to hear. So, together, if we was just to put these two into the same sphere, into the same part of the mix, it would clash. You know, like we were saying about the EQs and everything else like that. You want to give everything its own little bit of space. And so, basically, by separating these two out, it gives a bit of what we call like a studio widening effect, and makes that snare sound a lot more rich, a lot more full. So if we just go over what we are working with the snare, we've got our compressor. We've actually turned all of these off. Hang on a sec. So we've got our EQ again. We've got our compression, and we've got our saturation. If we look at the EQ, so if we remember with the kick drum, we had all of that information like highlighting in the bottom, but we had a lot of stuff that we wanted to get rid of at the bottom part of the mix, and we also cut off a lot at the top. Here, quite the opposite, because that sounds quite like we want to capture all of those high elements. capture all of those like high crisp sounds. It's like a whack pretty much. And so what we've got here in the EQ is all of that bottom information shelved off. We don't need it. And look how much we're saving as well. So if I was to turn that off, all of that noise is coming through. And that's just on one snare drum as well. Horrific. So like we want to get rid of all of that instantly, because if we don't, it's just going to muddy up the rest of the mix. We are doing a little bit of what we call here is just like bringing down certain frequencies, like pinch. There's a specific name for it. Apologies, it escapes me now. But what we're basically trying to do is highlight a few resonant frequencies. Hey, resonance. Highlight a few of those frequencies and just bring them down just so that they're not quite so ear piercing when it comes to a full mix. So if we was to just hear that again, this is that one area on its own. If I just highlight this one part, you hear that? Now, if you was in a club, like, or hearing that on a loud set of speakers, if we was to turn this up all the way here, you might even be able to hear it now. Ding, ding, ding. Even though you might not register it at the time, that is going to really do a number on your ears and on everybody else's. So we basically take that upon ourselves to listen out. This is what we call subtractive EQ. We want to bring down certain frequencies, and then additive EQ after, which is to bring up certain frequencies, which we have here. So right at the end, just to capture that really crisp bit, this is the part of sound. It's like you can even hear it here, just a little, but gives and helps deliver a certain bit of richness to that snare drum. You'll see the same in the clap, I assume. Yep, so all of that bottom information we've got rid. Not as much subtractive EQ this time, but just to bring up that high end there a little bit more and make sure it punches together in the mix. Compression. So again, just to make a sound, like make those snares sound really tight in the mix rather than a bit loose. If we take them out again, like difference might be negligible, but I can definitely hear a difference in the volume and without actually changing the volume itself, which is what we want to try not to do as much. If we turn those back on, and saturation, which, as I said earlier, is like a little bit more complicated. I won't go into it here, but just to make it sound a little bit more rich. We have both of those in a group as well with what we call a glue compressor. So because we have two different channels, two different sounds, we want to make sure that that snare doesn't sound like just two different samples next to each other. If we were to take it off, again, very small difference, but by turning on that glue compressor, we make it sound whole and full. We make it sound like one snare drum, rather than, like I said, a couple of samples put together. And again, a little bit more saturation on top of that. We're moving on. So, on to shakers. Good to see you, Lee. Hopefully you're still about. Yeah, good shout. And yeah, how are we doing on Insta? If we're all good, guys, if you're currently tuned in, you can find the links in bio to watch on Twitch or YouTube. So, be good to see you there. Moving on to shakers. So I'll try and move this on a little bit quicker than we have been. So, like, as you can imagine, get your rhythm sections in. Usually comes down to shakers or hi-hats. Afraid to say this isn't actually the source of the shaker sound that you're hearing right now. But the idea is still there, the sentiment. So this, in context with what else we have in regards to the rhythm section, bring in the hi-hats and the other cymbals, so you can see how like that sort of contextualizes the rhythm section that we have going on. So shakers, what we've got going here. So the compression's off again. Quite a few of the plugins are actually off. I don't know whether I've tampered with this before. So onto the EQ again. All that bottom information, faff, don't need it. It's just going to ruin the mix. And look, and that's the thing. This is why EQ is probably the most important part of your whole mix, is because if we didn't do any of it, look at how much information we still have at the bottom here. It's disgusting. So that needs to be taken off. A little bit of the highs taken off as well. Again, don't know how that sounds with it. So that'll be why they're taken off, is if you can hear that, that's verging on the sound of an annoying frequency range, an annoying resonant frequency, which we don't need in the mix, really. So if I turned it off, you actually get quite a full, rich sound from those shakers, to be fair, once taking it off. But, like, I think with the other rhythm sections coming, so with the other hi-hats, and especially with that bottom hi-hat, because there's so much reverb on it, it's creating so much more white noise in the mix, if you will, like so much more texture. You don't want these sound waves clashing. You don't want them interfering or hitting each other. So that would be right. It's almost like a trip through memory lane looking through quite a lot of this. So I've got to sort of run through my head. Why did I take this down? Why did I remove it? But I think it's all going to start coming back to me. So, yeah, with this one, just taking off the highs. Little bit of compression again. If we just solo that on its own. Without compression, with compression. Again, negligible difference, but just means it punches through the mix a little bit better. Hi-hats. So not too dissimilar to the shakers, might even be, yep, similar rhythm on the offbeat and 3 and 4 and yep. So both of them inhabiting that same space. If you notice as well on the side here, we've got our panning again. So we've got our shakers to the left and our hi-hat to the right. And what that means is, again, you've got these two essentially cymbals or two rhythm sections that are inhabiting the same space but just not clashing with each other. You don't want clashing, because obviously that can lead to distortion, could lead to unwanted fragments and characteristics in the mix. We're trying to be as resourceful as possible, and essentially the same with the snare. By sort of widening that stereo sound, you can make things sound bigger than the sum of their parts. So like handy to have those two inhabiting separate parts of the mix. With the hi-hats, that's going through an EQ again. You're starting to see a pattern here now with the rhythm section especially. A lot more of this information taken off of the bottom. Not so much that we're trying to rescue. I think this sample has been quite lenient with us this time. But some compression again as well. And yep, some saturation just to top that off. We'll move on to the main hi-hats. So we'll bring this back to an earlier part of the track as well. So I think we've got different rhythms going here, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. So basically, here in this part of the track, we're building. We don't want too many things interrupting the mix. So if we look at our signal chain again, if we just solo this, we can see so much needed to come out of the bottom here. I mean, look, the EQ just basically like changes the entire texture of the sound. Massive, absolutely huge change to that. Bit of subtractive EQ. We've got what seems like a resonant frequency. Can we hear it? Imagine that again. Like if it's loud enough, that's you're subconscious. Like it sounds a bit mincy, but you subconsciously you are going to pick that up. So like little bits like that do need to occur. And what we have at the end here as well is, even though we've rolled off some of those higher frequencies, we've also increased the level of the frequencies that are there. Like I was saying earlier, when it comes to things like hi-hats, snares, you want them to occupy that higher part of the frequency range, like tss and tss, like big like rhythmic sounds that you want people to follow along to. But the kick, and you know, even if you've got like toms, if you're familiar with drumming, like you've got your tom drums, that basically like carry a lot of big bumpy frequencies. So that's where you want to occupy this part of the studio image. So that's pretty much all of our drum bus. So that's all our entire rhythm section of this track. Pretty much just those few elements. Compared to a few other tracks, especially recently, there's quite a light rhythm section. But yeah, seems to do the trick. Sometimes you can just, like, you know, as I was once told, keep it simple, stupid. Yeah. So yeah, drum bus. We are moving on. So in context of the whole track as well. We can hear how that sits in there. Just take a quick moment to catch up with everybody, see where we're at. That looks like Daryl. How's it going, Daryl? All good. Unfortunately, yeah, a very significant lack of cowbell on this track, and probably a significant lack of Blue Oyster Cult to go with that as well. So, yeah, we're doing good. On Insta, how's it going, guys? Just the usual. If you've only just tuned in, links in bio to hear what we're all hearing right now. Should be card.co. Be good to see you there. See you in a sec. So the next part, right, we're moving on to the actual melodic parts of the tune. And what I have here, similar to how we had a group for our drums, we now have these two groups that say low side chain and high side chain. So this is another one where like side chaining is a little bit of a, it can be a bit difficult to explain, but hopefully in principle, and with a few good examples, you'll be able to get the idea. When you hear club music, electronic music in general, and to be fair, now nearly every producer does it, even like rock producers or whatnot, might take advantage of side chaining. It's a form of, it's compression. So how we covered compression, the sound waves, this blue line here and what appears under it. If we just like solo this, see these pulses. So we're basically saying that any sound that goes above that blue line gets brought down again. But instead of saying, instead of monitoring a specific track, so instead of saying like anytime a piece of this melody goes above a certain line, we're basically saying we're hooking up this side chain to a specific instrument. And in this particular instance, we're hooking that compression up to a kick drum, this kick drum. So 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, right? So how that compression is working, you can actually see it as a visualizer here, is all of it that's contained, all of the sounds that are contained within that compressor dive every time that sound comes into the picture. So every time that kick comes in, the whole mix is brought in. So it goes boom, boom, boom. It's like it's a pumping sound. So if I give you an example, if you imagine that kick in the divots, so all of those textures, might be better to showcase a different area. Hopefully you'll be able to hear where it's going, do, do. Right? So a side chain is pretty much what makes nearly all electronic music have that pump, that pulse that is like basically intrinsic to most of it. You find a lot of rock producers taking advantage of it now. Like pretty much anyone that's got a consistent, strong rhythm section takes advantage of side chaining because it gives space for the drum to be front and center in the mix. It means that this kick that we have going at the top here, no matter what is happening in the mix, you'll always hear that kick. There's like it will always come through perfectly. So if we just go back to that sidechain group, basically, and we'll come back to that in a sec, everything in this group is now being ducked every time that kick is in. So when it's not in, the sound will sound crisp as it does here. Not that part in particular, but if we just play the whole section. So because there's no kick happening in this specific section, the mid-late part, like where the rhythm section's just died down, if we bring it back to this section where we've got that kick going, can you hear how it's ducking in and out? Gives that pulse. So basically, yeah, I won't dawdle too much on that anymore, but that pulse is like delivering through and basically making the whole mix sound punchier and and danceable as well. I mean, like, it's a big thing that gets people moving. If you don't have side chaining, that rhythm section just gets completely buried and lost in the mix. So if let's have a quick look at our two groups then. So what we've got is a low side chain and a high side chain. So everything that I just described, what we're going to do in this section is basically cover our bass and our lower frequencies, the stuff where I've set the side chain to really deep, like take a deep dive, because we want, even though we want all of the higher sounding textures, which we'll get to in a second, we want all of those to be like very audibly visible. We want to be able to hear those but quite crisply. where we've got the lower side chain, that's where we want the feel to be going. I always say when it comes to playing bass, or when it comes to playing this music, like I particularly want people to feel the bass in their toes. I want them to feel it in their stomach. Like you've got all of the melody, like guitars, even drums, like, you know, the high parts of the drums or what, synthesizers or whatnot. That's all very good for emotion and for moving, but bass, you want to feel bass. Like you want it to be a gut punch every single time. So that's why I've set 2 different side chains for this particular group. If we start moving down, funnily enough, after all that, we actually have one part that's not actually melodic. This part probably could have been in the drum bus. The reason why it isn't, so it's basically like a big cavernous, like splash sound. So on its own, it might even beg the question of why we even have this. Good question. So basically, helps signify different sections of a track. So if I played this in context from here, we build in. I'll take away a little bit of drums, but when I want to come back in, lush. See? Like, so little embellishes like that. I didn't, at the time of making this track, I didn't really mess around with those too much. It's something that I've really gotten my teeth sunk into quite recently. But yeah, the reason why it's actually in this sidechain group is because, much like, except for the different drums, I don't want their sounds to be manipulated. I actually want this cavernous cymbal to duck along with the beat, so you can actually hear, like, that gives it that same sort of pulse. Whereas if I was to take that side chain off, play it along in the mix. In fact, that's a good example. If I actually take off that side chain completely, you can now hear how this part of the track, it doesn't pulse, it doesn't groove. Whereas if I put that back on, might be minute to some of you, but like that is a game-changing difference right there. So side chaining 101. So again, with that cavernous cymbal, this is one to just gloss over real quick. Again, loads of the bottom end taken out. If we look, not actually that much bottom end to take off this time. So even still, like with a tiny little amount like that, you still want to try and axe off as much of it as possible. Compression as well, just to bring that up. But yeah, let's move on to the bass. So what we have here is a bass bus, similar to our drum bus and our different group channels. This is just because our bass has many different elements, or at least 3 in this instance. And I would like them all to sound like one instrument, like we did with the glue compression a little while back. I'll run through that again. But basically, our bass line leading into this, very simple. This is a preset off of a synthesizer that I swear by called Massive. If I just see the only issue I've got is my CPU, so I want to be very very careful with how I play about with different synthesizers in here. But this sound, I'm probably going to get crucified for this, is actually a preset off of Massive. Oh my days. But it's called Blue and Grey. And if I give a quick preview of that. Lovely. Absolutely lovely. Doesn't even need any changing. As soon as I heard it, I fell in love with the sound instantly. And so, yep, that is what I've used in quite a few of my tracks. But in this instance, I used it as the main melody line. If we look at some of the processing, we've got all of that. So again, doesn't look like much, but that's actually quite a significant amount of low end. Just checking with people on Instagram. How we doing? If you would like to hear what we're hearing, YouTube and Twitch. Link in the bio. Good shout. So we see here, we've done a little bit of subtractive EQ again. There are actually a few of these that say M and S. This is called mid-side EQ or mid-side compression. I'm not even going to begin to get into that on this because I've already spent enough time explaining stuff. But like I said, would be happy to touch on that at some point down the line. But yeah, as we can see here, little bit of subtractive EQ on a high frequency. This one's not too punishing, but you can still hear that. That is going to be annoying to work with, like on much bigger speakers than we're used to using. So it's got to go. Rest of it, it's actually brought it down. So you can see, or like even on the visual representation, there's not actually a lot of high frequencies to this particular sound. So we're basically just emphasizing all of this middle section here. We're rolling off a bit of those low ends because what we're wanting to introduce, I would also, as standard, compression and saturation, with a little bit of pull tech as well. Again, just makes it sound a nice bit more round on the bass, like makes it sound a little bit more thick and punchy. But again, go into that on a separate time. What we pair that up with is a sub bass. So this is one where you're definitely going to need some headphones. It might be coming through on a phone, but I'd imagine quite faintly. And the reason for that is because, like, as I'm sure many of you have been annoyed by boy racers coming past with the neon lights under their cars and the exhaust blaring out, the one thing you're obviously also going to be hearing is a fat amount of sub. So we have, in this instance, separated out that main melody. This bass group has the two of those sounds together. And so by separating them, because the problem is with low end especially, and with sub especially, it gets very messy very quickly. So what we want is complete control over each of those different frequencies. If I just said we're going to control the bass in this one main melody, this one section here, then we're going to be trying to turn up higher pitch frequencies, but that's going to affect the bottom end as well. So we want both of these in two separate areas so that we can have the most amount of control over that sound as we possibly can. So hopefully that's pretty cut and dry. With the sub, contrary to every other track that we've done so far, and again, this might be if there's any of the Resonance lot watching or anyone who really knows their shit when it comes to production, I could probably do with a few hints and tips here, but I elect to have basically no processing on my sub. I have actually got a little bit on here, rolling off just that little bottom end part there and rolling off a lot of the highs. If we was to actually hear the sub, there's actually quite a little bit in that high section. So obviously we don't need that information. It doesn't need to be there in the mix. So pretty much this as like a frequency around itself. We want it to be bland. We want it to be we don't want much texture on the top. We just want a nice warm buttery bass at the bottom there. Nice little reference there. So moving on to the second part of the bass, which is the horn section. So we still have our sub, but instead of it being in punchy little sections, we are going to elongate each of those notes, and you can see highlighted here, like those lows really start to hit low. That's where you will start to feel it in your toes, in your stomach, etc. So what that's accompanied with is a horn section this time. So instead of our main melody, so for context, the two different areas, this is how that main melody sounds in the mix. Obviously the introduction, building into that, still hear that quite there. And as we go into the middle section where all the drums drop out, that melody is still carrying us along. But in the transition, we move over to the horns and we no longer have any need for this particular melody, as you can hear. Ready? So we could still have that. But it would just be too dense. It would just get lost in the mix. So we just get rid of that part. And instead, we now have this horn section where if we check, there's actually quite a bit of processing on this particular... Yeah, look. Otherwise, this gets messy. So, we can see here we've rolled off all that bottom end because that sub is being controlled in the sub-bass section. We've also rolled off the highs because with this being a part of the bass, we don't need... we need to save that space for the higher frequencies, for the more textured parts of the frequency. Little bit of subtractive EQ here, as usual. Resonant frequencies that we don't want in the mix, especially there. That's nasty. It's like being lost in the middle of a cave right there. So nice little bit of oomph along the middle part of the frequency here because we want a little bit more punch. But we again, like rolling off those highs, we want to just make sure that that is reserved exclusively for our high-pitched instruments, for our more textured, rhythmic sounding instrumentation. So that's our bass section. On our bass bus, as we've done with every other group track, we glue that all together with a glue compressor. So if we heard it without, and again, headphones. See, I bet barely any of you be able to tell the difference of that one. I don't even like. So I can barely tell the difference, but that's much better. You can actually hear how the two of them are now like basically it's become one bass line rather than separate instances of each. If we look at the pan-in of that again as well, we can actually see that the sub. So usually when it comes to bass, we don't want to put it one side of the mix or another. We like to keep it center. So our sub, like, or at least every time I do a sub, I keep it straight in the middle. But in this instance, usually I keep the other bass elements in the middle as well, but I've actually elected to put them both on the left-hand side. I think a big reason for this actually comes in the next part of the track. So we shall move on. How are we doing, Instagram chat? Nice to see you all. And yeah, if you guys want to see more, move on over to Twitch and YouTube. Moving on to the section called O. Let's see. Oh, and just checking chat, guys. How's it going? Joe, Amanda, good to see you guys. Yeah. Daryl getting onto the Gangnam Style. Yeah, and typing on the phone is not fun. Can attest to that, absolutely. So, the next part of our track is quite simple. It's just... Oh. Like, and this was actually a part of this main melody, this section here. So a bit of what we call call and response. Clues in the name. Like when a melody makes a certain request, there's another part of the melody that calls back in response. But I actually elected to separate the two of these out because it gave quite a bit of stereo imaging. Made it sound a bit wider to separate and pan a little as well. So you might be able to hear that this like O section is actually panned to the right as opposed to the left that the other section is. So just makes it sound wider, makes it sound a bit bigger. Yeah, not much to this track either. The compressor's off again, don't know why. Oh yeah, actually you can really hear the difference with the compressor on. So as we can see in here, a lot of the bottom part is cut out, and look, all of that information at the bottom there being cut out of the mix. If we were to just hear that on its own, that's quite muddy. Like that's quite a dense sound. So if we bring that back in, like it becomes a lot more crisper. We've got our subtractive EQ. And we've rolled off a lot of the highs again because we want to save that for our side chain a little bit down the line. Compression, just because it's quite a faint sound and around itself as we heard the first time. But rather than bringing that up, basically rather than bringing that up, we can use the compressor to make it sound higher in the mix and a lot tighter. So that along with some saturation, if we hear it without saturation, wow, so the saturation really makes a difference there. You can hear a difference in how crisp that is. If like very muddy, there's not much clarity to that. But if we introduce some saturation, a little bit of distortion, how much richer does that sound compared to everything else? Really helps it sit above the mix quite nicely. Beautiful. Bit of saturation. Saturation completely changed the game. So, moving on to the riser. So, like risers, usually familiar with these in most styles of electronic music. It's a nice little signifier, ways to keep things fresh. Build into a certain section. I'll play the sound. You guys are probably familiar with it instantly. All we have is just a hint of white noise building up there. So, builds up, and then essentially releases with reverb and delay thrown in. So that, like, you know, basically introduce a huge amount of echo so that it trails into the rest of the track after. If we hear that in context, you can hear how it goes from, helps to signify move from one section to the other. We'll do a bit of A and B. So this is it with the riser. Even then, that's being a bit cheeky and just sort of cutting it off before the start of the next section. That's to do with the kick being dropped as well, but that's just a little bit of fun for me more than anything else. So if we were to take that off and hear it without that signifier, hear it without that riser, might still work, but doesn't have the same sort of dynamics, doesn't have that same sort of anticipation to it all. So, like, a riser is a great way of being able to make something that is basically just a copy and paste. There's quite a lot of this which is like copy and paste. But with these little elements, with your risers and with the cavernous cymbals like we covered, you know, these things, we can really introduce a lot of dynamics into making music. And essentially make something that might only sound exciting for about a minute and a half into something that's exciting for 5-6 minutes. So risers, cymbals, drenched in reverb, drenched in delay. You're laughing all the way to the bank when it comes to making this sort of music. So definitely risers are an essential way of keeping our mixes interesting. This is a little bit more of a full fat riser if I just turn the sound on here. And all it is just a little bit of white noise, but with a few filters that basically make it start from something really small and just build into something big. Our EQ, very basic. We don't want to retain too much information. We don't need to take away too much either. There's not too much harmony. There's not any harmony in a riser, really. So we get rid of all of that mess at the bottom. I mean, look, it's just not that bad, to be fair, but still quite hard to rise there. We actually want to increase the top part of that spectrum, that high bit, that frequency, because we want this to be quite high in our mix. Again, like you can hear in context how it signifies a move from one section to the next. So moving on to half riser. So very similar in concept to the riser, not too much more to go over. Clues in the name, rather than being a full riser, it is, if I play this right, half. Hey, so pretty much this is more ideal for, rather than building up anticipation, it's where that anticipation is probably being built up by separate elements, but you still want to make an entrance. You still want to come in with a bang. So no build up, all payoff. If we hear that in context. So we've got that second section where we've had all of these synths building up, rhythm sections playing alongside it. So again, all that builds there. So again, we're there already. We don't need to build in. We're already there. Half risers. Half risers, very, very essential alongside your normal risers for being able to make some big dynamic breaks. And we have this little cutie right here. What is this? I can't even remember what this is. Ah, right. This is just an odd little tidbit that I was finding on my travels, decided to keep aside because I might find a good place for it in the track. And similar to the half riser, except the other way round is that instead of it being a full riser building in, it's sort of like a transition. Like I like to call it invasion of space. It's one of my favorite musical terms. So like when a song or a track goes from being really quiet to really in your face, really big. I love invasion of space. I love like dynamics is a really big part of that. It's about starting from something small and and just going into something bigger, or going from something really big into something small. By making such a big change and playing it smart as well, it subverts people's expectations. It keeps music exciting. It keeps the dynamics fresh. And pretty much. I love dynamics anticipation, and I love invasion of space when it comes to making music. So like here is it in context. So you've got like the introduction, very few elements, and this builds in right to as the rhythm section comes in. Just all on its own as well. Simple, easy. But every time, hopefully you'd want to hear this track a little bit more often now that you've heard it. But like you'll come across little bits like this, at least when I've been watching other people make their songs, and it's all those little elements that now I can hear them. Once I hear it in the track, I'm like, oh, actually, that little bits like that is what like makes the small details really shine through, at least for me anyways. Not trying to get up my own arse about a track, but it's what I love about hearing other people making music as well. So that is all of our lower side chain area. That is all of our bass covered. That is all of our like risers covered. So we shall move on to the higher part of the side chain now, which is all of our higher synth frequencies. If I just take a quick moment to have a quick look on Insta. Yeah, we're looking all right there. If you guys are watching, links in the bio to watch on Twitch and YouTube. And just checking the chat. Hente, good to see you, mate. Thanks for all the support on Twitter. It's been absolutely massive. In fact, a big shout out to all the Gooners on Twitter. You guys have been absolutely incredible. I would like to try and be as fair to as many different football teams as possible. I'm not actually a football fan myself. But obviously, most of you know my brother. Most of you know he is the most loyal, faithful, and biggest Gooner on the planet, but also the biggest football fan you could ever hope to come across. He will happily talk about every other team under the sun besides Arsenal. But because of him and his outreach to all of you, I literally cannot get over how much love I've got off of Twitter and the Gooners, the Arsenal squad on Twitter. So to all of you, thank you very much, and I hope you're enjoying what you're watching. So we move on to the higher part of the side chain. So going back to what we were saying about side chain earlier, all of it's when the frequency gets ducked by a specific signal. In this instance, it is getting ducked by the kick drum. So for reference, we have our kick here, and that kick is once every beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. And what we're seeing with this sidechain group here is we are seeing the signal get ducked, just not quite as strongly as this one. Because even though I actually got the wrong one open here. The high sidechain. Here we go. That looks a lot better. That looks a lot better. So basically the signals coming across here, the threshold is a lot higher. What that means is that the higher parts of the song, the ones in the higher frequencies, will come through a lot clearer. They will have a lot more clarity to them. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't want to go over the whole sidechain thing again because I've spent a lot of time on that already. But if we look into this channel, we'll start with the top. In fact, I'm going to start with some of the other sections because I think like these make a little bit more sense after the fact. So I'm going to start with the lead. So this is probably the most recognizable part of the track. It's just the lead line that pretty much is the hook. So anyone who I've talked to at length about songwriting, music production, the whole process, knows that my favorite element of making music is a hook. Nearly all of my music, I'd like to believe, lives and dies by the hook. I am a fan of listening to music that obviously like whether it provides soundtrack purposes or for the purposes of being like a consistent melody, strong melody or whatnot to follow along. But I love hooks. It's like in pop music, it's choruses, it's what you find yourself whistling throughout the day. It's all of your old favorite video game tunes, all your favorite movie theme songs. They're hooks essentially, and so like without a hook, I don't feel like the music that I make really has anything to offer. So this is the takeaway in this piece of music. James, my brother, actually said it reminds him of something. I can't remember. It's one of the old school late 90s, mid 2000s tunes. Might be like Dane Bowers or something. He'll probably put it in the chat in a second. Just like it was a bit like, oh crap, it sounds exactly like something else. But that never matters at the end of the day. People are always going to be able to take their own extracts from it. Don't ever be put off by thinking that your music sounds like somebody else's. There's always a way to make it sound exclusively yours. So yeah, moving on. Like lead sound, what have we got in this lead sound? So going over what we've gone before, our basic EQ, compression and distortion, our saturation. If we check out our EQ here, not too much to take off the bottom, but you can see that we've done a little bit of subtractive EQ. We've seen these frequencies here. Oh, can you hear that? You can feel that, surely. That's disgusting. That's a horrifically loud EQ frequency. That needs to disappear instantly. This one as well. Not as bad. Could probably actually do with being moved over a little bit, I think. Maybe if we move it there. Yeah. But both of those have to come down just to save everybody's ears. Here, however, though, you can see we've got quite a bit that could do with like coming through in the mix. Obviously, all our high end here. That is just giving that little bit of sparkle. If we was to turn that off, makes it sound a lot flatter, which it's not game changing necessarily, but I want this lead line to be, it's the pride and place. Like it's where I want it to be sitting in the mix the entire time. So I want to put some priority onto this in the mix. Make it that much more louder so that like it's basically coming through at all points. We've got our pull tech again with some compression just to make it come across a lot more crisper in the mix. So you can even hear that tiny little bit of difference there, but it means that like it's tighter and we're able to get a lot more clarity out of that sound without increasing the volume or decreasing it. Panned off to the right, you can see quite a few of our different melodies here are panned off in different directions. So we'll move on to those in a sec, but like with just a little bit of saturation on the end there, we have got our next part of the track. So you can hear that in context with the rest of the song. I mean, you can't miss it. It's literally right there front and full center. We move on to the ARP. So an ARP is short for arpeggio. So if you it's like when you've got a note on the third, a first note, third note, and a fifth note. Like I don't know theory. I don't know anything. Don't know anything straight up. But like when it comes to an arpeggio, it's basically different notes in the same scale that are played at varying intervals to create an arpeggiated effect. So for context, that'll be this part of the track here. So it's basically just one note spread across three different areas. Da, do, da, da, do, da. However, with a bit of manipulation at the source, I can't actually show you, unfortunately, because it's a part of the original recording, but that's got a bit of delay on there. So what you should probably be hearing is just like the one track without any reverb or delay, but like with the added effects on there, it then adds this percussive element where rather than just going like do, da, do, da, da, do, da, because of that delay happening, you've got like hopefully that puts it across. You can hear that difference that's going on in the arpeggio. Adds a nice bit of character, a bit of rhythm to it. In arpeggios, a delay is nearly always essential, just because without it, it lacks that rhythm. It lacks that driving rhythm to be able to really do anything with it on its own accord. So this arpeggio goes on for quite a while. It also evolves as well. So at the source, I'll basically be twisting knobs, dials and whatnot to open up the sound. It's called open up the filter, but it basically means that you're able to make the sound start off small and grow bigger over time. You can hear here it's getting really quite loud before it all builds up to the middle section and then comes back down afterwards to see the final section of the track. So in context, that arpeggio comes in here. Nice little introduction. No, not too in your face just yet. All about pace and timing with this as well. So again, with those risers that we mentioned earlier, introducing certain parts, bringing them back, showing a little bit of restraint in certain areas, and then just allowing this arpeggio to really grow into itself over time. It really helps flesh out a track that could only be interesting for about 1.5 minutes and really make it its own beast, really make it its own interesting piece of music for 5+ minutes. So in context as well, like the rest of that arpeggio as it's building goes into the middle section where everything dies down, but where the drums have been taken out, it leaves a lot more room for all of these other synthesizers, all these other sounds to flourish. So you can hear here there's so much room for these synthesizers to breathe, for this arpeggio to breathe in particular. And then once it goes into this section, you can see where the signal is going to cut off, and we'll then move into the next stage of the arp. So climax, it's that evasion of space once again. We've basically said, right, in your face, and now we bring it all back again. So it's like, whoa, wait a minute, what's happened there? So that arp is now back from climbing up to here. Big payoff. Shuts off, and we're now back to keeping it simple. So kept these on 2 separate tracks because of being in different sections of the song. They will require different parts to be adjusted. So with our EQ again, not loads to shave off here in the bottom sections. If I just bring it here again, we're not saving too much down here, but there's quite a lot of the frequency that's not really sitting at the top end here, but and not too much adjustment to the actual sound itself as well. One really high pitched frequency again that just needed to be brought down, a bit of subtractive EQ, but besides that, actually I thought it sounded quite all right mixed in with the rest of it. If we look to the arp here, did we do the same? So for the second part of the track, you can see it's actually quite a lot more wild. We've got 2 subtractive frequencies here. That one especially needs to be coming down. And so where we've cut off the same amount from the bottom end, we've actually shaved off a little bit more of that high end whilst bringing up what remains in that particular section. So that'll be because during this part of the song, especially if I play it from here, it's so busy everywhere else. We've got drums in full whack, we've got bass in full whack, that lead line is occupying, and those risers are occupying the high part of the track. We want to have a lot more control over that arp as opposed to back here, where it's got plenty of room to breathe. It's got plenty of room to be doing what it wants to be doing. So we're doing good. We're moving on to the ARP attempt, or the copy of ARP attempt here. Let's see. So it's the response. So again, this is touching on the call and response that we mentioned about with that lead line where it's like, boop. So a certain part of the melody calls for a certain section and it responds in kind. So the response is this particular section. So actually is meant to play in with the ARP itself and the lead line. Oh no, wait, it is playing off the lead line. So if we hear that lead, can completely out of tune there, but even still, the idea's in there. So that is like in the middle section where we've been having this lead line repeating. It's almost like calling out. So almost like with the theme, and this actually touches back to the theme of the track name, Erebus. So about the ship that sailed alongside the HMS Terror. It's like the original space race. Franklin's expedition. They made Ridley Scott actually made a TV show about it called Terror. Fascinating. One of the most fascinating history stories I've ever explored. And there's this idea of just being completely lost in the middle of the Arctic and the tundra with like literally zero hope of being able to get out. And so there was a lot, I felt like a lot of call and response was quite a good characteristic for this track, because it's this feeling of being lost at sea or being lost in the Arctic. Like, you know, you're calling out to whoever might be able to come along and save your skin. So call and response felt quite thematic to the actual song itself. This is another one that essentially starts to build in time with the music. So you can hear the volume there. We actually increase that a little bit as the track goes on. In context. And so similarly again as well, where it's a call and response, we want them to occupy two different areas of the stereo imaging. So we have our ARP response on the left hand side as indicated here, and we have our main lead on the right hand side. So we've got left and right both happening there. And with these ARPs as well, I've actually just noticed something. If we watch here, these bits here, they've got a little red dot and they're moving from left and right. It would help if we actually heard it. This is called automation. So basically this is where I've just got the mouse and controlled it left and right here. This basically means that that sound, that arpeggio, is moving, like it's got a life of its own. It's waving from one side to the other, from left to right. So you might be able to hear that if you're paying attention to the arpeggio line here. You definitely hear that in the mix. It's like, just adds character, gives a little bit of life to something that essentially you know, like had plenty of it to begin with, but just a little bit of character for good measure. Just seeing the Instagram chat, how we're all doing there. If you guys are watching on Insta, the link is in my bio to be able to watch on YouTube and Twitch. So it'd be good to see you there. So hopefully that illustrates a little bit more with regards to the high side, just so the higher frequencies that we have in that track. The a little bit to do with panning as well. Again, just anything that adds a little bit of flair, a little bit of character. I'm all about it, and there's infinite amount of ways to do so. But usually you can find a few tried and tested methods and just basically play along with that. So what to finish off that section, and we haven't really got much more after this, which is probably handy for most of you. We have got, especially since I'm occupying Valentine's Day. Apologies in advance, guys. Obviously, I had no fucking idea it was Valentine's Day. And so I appreciate all of you for taking the time to, which you could be spending with your partner, with your loved one. You're actually electing to spend it with me. So I really appreciate that, guys. Thank you all very much. And yeah, we'll try not to keep you for too much longer. So what we've got here is our drones. Also, what I called in the latest reel is a siren. So again, like, you know, lost at sea. Like, you know, what do you hear? You hear the enticing calls of banshees, of mermaids, of, like, you know, the old sailor stories. It's a little bit weird, is it? I don't know. Like, I just think it adds a nice bit of texture to the track. It's you know, it's almost calling out to you. Like, you just started getting a little bit of cabin fever, and suddenly you can just hear that siren's voice off in the distance, just calling you in. So this, if we check our systems here, we've basically cut off a lot of the low end again. A bit of corrective EQ. not too bad. Oh, but look, you can see how well that much that climb. See, that's the thing, is that like you have to anticipate where the sound waves are going to go, because that could just be completely off guard. If you were only paying attention to like 2 seconds of that, you'd have completely missed it was even there. And even now, that's even harsher. So like that's why corrective EQ is like the bread and butter of all of this. But we bring up those highs because obviously it's not a bass, it's not low in frequency, it's quite high, so we want to accentuate those parts. We really want to make those textures like bleed through and sing. So that is the part that plays in the middle section. So for context, again, this whole middle section, especially when we get to the Foleys in a moment, like the sound effects, I had this like idea of it being like, you know, lost at sea, lost in the Arctic, or in context to the theme of the track. And it just feels like this last glimmer of hope before everything. Like this is just the point where everyone starts losing their minds, and now, bam. Now we're in the danger zone. Now there's no going back. Spoiler alert, everyone dies. So, the last part, the last drones we have, is actually a collection of 2. So, we have our drone in again. So, similar to the siren call that we had in the middle, we have got that pan to our left. Actually, notice now we haven't got any panning on that drone in the middle. Amateur hour, if you ask me. But we have a little bit more melody interjected into this drone now. But what we also have is an accompanying horn section, which is similar in texture to the bass that we had in our low part of the side chain. If I just play the 2 together, so we've got this and yeah, this. We just play from here. So they're actually like the same sound, but just like one pitched a lot higher, one pitched a lot lower. But this helps to bring that siren call from earlier into the context of where we're at now, which is the final payoff, right? Like it's the doom of the horns brought in with that last faint bit of hopelessness with the drone section. So together, both of them sound like this. Oh, and that's with the horns in there. I'll get rid of those quick. But, like, because of where, if we just take a look at the frequency spectrum again, so, like, a lot of lows that are being cut out here, bit of corrective EQ, compression, just to make them sound tight, but a bit of saturation. And for context, if we just hear before, like, they come in and after, we've got a final payoff here. I'll just bring it a bit closer, save some time. We've got that horn section that's building up to a payoff. Then in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sounds a bit low to me in the mix, but even still, the idea is there. The that lead line is still doing its thing. This section, there's actually the live version that I play of this. This section's about 3 or 4 times as long. It's one of the. It's probably the only time I do a solo on the keys. Once I get a little bit more comfortable with handling that side of it, I'll look to introduce it a lot more. But that, besides this last section called Foley, which hopefully I can wrap up in about 5 minutes, is basically all of the different elements of the track combined. So if we just cover this Foley section real quick. Foley is the music production term, and you hear it a lot in movie making as well. It's your sound effects, it's your like breaking of twigs, it's the sound of leaves blowing through the wind, sound of waves crashing, of like, you know, a Foley is hold a microphone to a sound effect and like basically introduce that into a song, into the screen, into whatever. So we've got a few of those. We've got a breeze. This should hopefully be quite short and sweet. Barely anything. Look, that's not even really registering on the in terms of the actual sounds that are coming through. But if we hear that in context, and again, setting that scene, like Erebus, like sailing alongside HMS Terror, setting sail, the open sea. And like you've got the waves crashing along. And so like pretty much this sort of, I love introducing little bits of texture into the back of tracks, even if it's the sound of a jungle, the sound of a busy street or whatnot. Depending on how low or high you have it in the mix. You have it high, it can take you out of the song. If you have it too low, obviously, like there's no scenery whatsoever. But there's a lot of producers, nearly all the best producers that at least that I've watched, that have a little bit of background noise happening, even if you'd never guess it was there. There's just something that if you've seen Fight Club, you're probably familiar with the subliminal messaging, the flashes of images or whatnot. This is sort of similar in that vein. It's trying to subconsciously introduce a theme, an idea, a setting that, like, you know, it sort of puts you into a place even though you're not instantly recognizing that. So there's a little bit of breeze there. What we have is sea waves in the middle of the song. So a lot more pronounced. It's very similar to the breeze right there at the start, but now we're right in the middle of the ocean. Like, you know, there's like all you can see is just waves upon waves upon waves. In fact, if we introduce here, and if you see our panning, we've got left and right again. So we've got two different sets of waves. Makes sense because you're obviously not going to have one wave the same as the other. You've got both of these waves crashing along the sides of the boat or wherever you're at. You can basically hear two different sets of waves on each side. So if we hear those in context, the part of the track this comes in is just as everything's faded out. And now, like, we're getting to a point where the hope is starting to dissipate. Like, all we can see is waves. And I mean, all of this is basically exclusively storytelling at this point. There's no real musical characteristics, but it can really help to hit home a theme, an idea of a song that you have in mind. So, you know, like, these are so pronounced. They're actually quite high in the mix, I think, but that's out of intent. Like, you know, again, with the song names, with the setting, we really want to get that idea of being lost at sea. So this last one is very interesting, actually. So it's just white noise, right? This is actually getting a bit away from the theme of the track, and actually something that as soon as I introduced it, I couldn't do without it. Pretty much the whole section that goes from the middle section to the final doomed horn driven section, the last build up, if you will, is a little bit of white noise that sort of it loses the context of the track, but it brings it's that invasion of space again. It makes it feel like you've just done a jump from one setting to another. If I just contextualize it, so basically on its own, it's just that. It's like an old VHS TV, you know, like the tiny little ones with built-in VHS, or like white noise signal. You might even have something on, but like it's like a little vinyl hiss, a little bit of white noise hiss. And so in this section, the way that the bass comes in and everything else like that, I think there's this whole section benefits tremendously just from that tiny bit of white noise. And I might be losing my mind, but let's just do a quick A/B and you guys tell me what you think, because I think it completely makes the section. So this is it without. Okay, and this is it with. Yeah? No? I might be completely talking out my arse, but I think it completely makes this section of the track. So Foley, a really essential part of any mix, I think. I've started to introduce it quite a lot. Obviously, with these sort of samples, I'm saying obviously a lot, obviously not obvious to a lot of people, obviously, but this particular white noise is going to have a lot of background information. Look at that. So we cut all that off. If we didn't have it, it would just be way too present in the mix. It would take up way too much room. We only want that top little bit of hiss. We want that little bit of character on the top end. And I think with that, I actually think we can wrap up there. We'll have a full listen to the song. I'll probably add in a little bit of commentary as we listen through. Answer a few questions as well. I'll actually check the chats whilst we're listening. But that covers all of the main areas of the track. We've covered the drums, we've covered the bass, the synthesizers, the high ends, the noises, the Foleys that make up each and every part of the track. And hopefully you guys have learned a little bit of music production, a little bit of the tools that we utilize to make these tracks sound as best we can. Like I said, EQs, compressors, saturations, that's your bread and butter, really. I've actually made a few reels about this in the past, which what I'll do is I will share them in my story again. So it will be EQ, compression, and saturation. If you guys want to see what I did on those, they're probably about 10-15 seconds each, but give you an idea if a bit more on what those 3 different channels do. But yeah, let's give the track a quick whirl so you can hear everything in action. I'll answer a few questions, answer a few bits along the way, but yeah, really appreciate you guys taking the time out to watch and listen. Hope you enjoyed. I'm going to be looking to do the same next Wednesday as well. If you guys are up for it, I'll open a poll. I think I'm going to pick a track for next week. But after that, I'll start opening up to the polls, and whatever results we get in, I'll start to cover that. I've got a few more ideas for streams and recorded content as well. So yeah, thank you all very much once again, and until next time, hope you enjoy the track, and speak to you soon. All good on Insta, as I was saying. Might be a bit late now, but if you want to get involved on the stream next time, Twitch and YouTube, the links are in my link in bio. But if you want to know just totally for next time, I'll be happy to send a message over. Yeah, I don't think many people imagined a massive death hentai, so I've got quite a twisted way of coming up with song ideas, or at least some of them. Look into Beaufort if you fancy a bit more of that as well. So yeah, let's see. Yep, good shout, Dale. Jesus, never going to let me live that one down. Sorry, mate. White noise most definitely does contribute to like the sound of waves crashing or whatnot. Didn't actually think of it that way, so that's actually a really good shout. Like, they do make quite a prominent point in most other tracks as well, but in this instance, yeah, it does actually help deliver a little bit of that. So nice one, Johnny. Really appreciate the support, man. Johnny, man, like, it's been one of my biggest, along with quite a few other people. Johnny's been one of the biggest supporters of mine and this project. So really appreciate all the support there, Johnny. And yep, I'm looking to make this a weekly thing. And I'm glad you enjoyed it, mate. Same time next week, or if there's a time that suits everybody better, I will be more than happy to do these on the regular. As long as I've got the content to share out. So really glad you enjoyed that, and yeah, really glad, really hope the rest of you enjoyed it as well. So we've got our risers coming in, because we're coming to the end of a certain section. And straight out again. And you really want that reverb and delay to just really carry that part out. As far as you can see, pretty much. Again, like the waves, as far out as you can see. So, and you can really hear those waves crashing. And those half risers again. So, again, like, didn't need a big anticipation there, but just a nice little entrance, nice little payoff going into that. Sirens calling out. If you guys get the chance, look up Franklin's expedition. It's nuts. Absolutely nuts. Don't read it before bed. So again, invasion of space. Can you hear that white noise? Am I the only one who hears the white noise? Let me know. Another thing I didn't mention is actually this hi-hat section. I did actually program this one in myself rather than paste and copy and paste the same bit over and over. This is one I would actually like to play live at some point as well. A bit like Fred again, with the buttons. Bring a bit more of a live drum element to it. Definitely want to make the live show a lot more of an investment. Like do a lot more with myself during the live shows. And again, you think of those half risers. Don't need to build up. Yeah, it's coming. Everything else is doing the hard work. And half riser. And so with that build up again, that Sirens call comes back with the extra horns this time. So it's just coming up to the end here now, but just want to say once again, guys, thank you all so much for coming along to my first ever stream. It was nerve-wracking. Really, was really not looking forward to it, but it's actually been an absolute pleasure. So I really look forward to doing more of these. Really hope you enjoyed it, guys. So, yep, I'll let this play out. And until next time, guys, happy to chat as well just after this. I think I've got a few messages to check based off of the live stream that I saw. But yep, happy to catch up with any of you. If there's any questions you got, feel free to shot me a message. But until next time, guys, thank you very much. All the best. Peace.